shall we start rolling the bus?
Yeah, let's
So
do it.
welcome to the maturity model for Microsoft 365 practitioners call for October. We're today going to be talking about future ready. What do mature organizations do next? Very much a conversation today instead of a presentation, but the core team will be here for you to sort of drive the talk, and Sharon is probably going to take most of the lead. Our agenda for today is to just talk a little bit about the maturity model and what it is in case you're new to this. We'll also take a picture, because we always do, and make people come off, show their video and wave and smile and act goofy, so that we can, that's the community part of this, is to make sure that we all appreciate each other. And then we'll talk a little bit about how you can contribute to the maturity model. This is very much an open source thing. Yes, there is a core team and we agonize over lots of details about this, but we're always looking for your feedback and ideas. And then we'll have the main event where we'll ask you some questions and hopefully get some good conversation going. So if you want to join us every month, that first link is the recurring calendar series. That'll put it into your calendar every month on the third Tuesday of the month, which is what this is. We sometimes do not meet. We'll have a calendar coming up that will show you which days we are and which days we're not. And you can also follow us on Meetup. We've started posting these calls also in the global Microsoft 365 Employer Platform Meetup events. So if you're a Meetup person, check us out there. So what is this thing that we're talking about, the maturity model? It's made up of a set of articles, artifacts, if you will, and some of them are not necessarily articles, but a bunch of content that you can use in order to think about your organization's relative maturity level, what maturity level that you would like to get to based on the specific competencies, and on some level, how would you get there? So really, we look at this as a way to benchmark your organization, a way to figure out what you need to improve, and a way to, make those improvements. It also helps a lot when you're having discussions, if you're in IT with, discussions with management, for example, or if you're in management and you want to have your marketing people understand why we're using the technology the way we are. It hopefully becomes a set of sort of vocabulary and tools that you can use in those conversations. A lot of times, we find as consultants that people just think, well, you turn these things on and all of a sudden everyone's just brilliant. And it's not that simple. You can't just get all the benefits from this platform without doing some work to get there. And it's, we also hope that you can use this in just general conversations, in your work to try to measure how you're doing from day to day. Those of us on the core team probably don't go a day without saying maturity model at some point. It's a little bit of our hammer, because we like to use hammers to put in all the nails and screws and put boards together and everything. But it's also a nice framework to think about how you can add value to your organization, where you can focus your efforts. The maturity model for Microsoft 365 is based on the competency maturity model that came out of Carnegie Mellon back in the late 80s, early 90s, mainly focused on technology. And the idea is that there are different levels that you can attain that will, serve you in various ways. Roughly speaking, when you're at level 100, everything's sort of ad hoc and reactive, and you're not really, you don't really have a strategy per se. You've in the case of Microsoft 365, you've sort of turned it on and hope for the best. The intent there is, let's keep putting the fires out and keep the lights on. We're not quite sure how it's all working, but people are using it. Level 200 is more of a managed level. You're starting to put some better practices in place. You're starting to have some predictability. You're starting to think about how should people be consistent about what they're doing. Hopefully everyone starts to understand how they should do things. Like, do I need a team site? What is a team site? Do I need a communication site? Do we have an intranet? Level 300 is actually a very nice place to be, the defined level. Very nice place to be in many organizations, in many competencies. You're not going to try and go to a higher level on everything, nor should you. You should be, based on the importance of things in your organization, you should be thinking about which competencies are most important and which ones you want to change. So level 300, you've got documented practices, things are policy driven, planned, controlled, stable. I'm reading the words from the slide, but basically you sort of know what's going on and everyone's pretty comfortable with how it works. And that takes different, manifests in different ways across different competencies. Level 400, things become very predictable. We're not only have we documented everything and we've got standard practices, but we're starting to build feedback loops, and we have ways to handle that feedback, and we're making sure that we're starting to consistently look at, well, what can we do better now? Because we've got things working well enough that we can start to look at continuous improvement, maybe building some AI into things. Starting to let the system tell us more about what we should do next. Not just what Microsoft marketing says, but what is actually going to start your organization doing things better. And then level 500, I think of as the NASA level. You may never get to this level in any competency, and that's not a bad thing. It's whether you want to be there. I call it the NASA level because, when they fire off one of those rockets, they need to be pretty darn sure that the people in that rocket are going to be okay. Collaboration and communication by its very nature is a little messier than that. And so a lot of the times we never get to that level. And again, that's okay, but it's something that you want to think about. There may be some competencies where you want to aim that high. All right. Who's going to take the picture?
I'm all ready to go.
There's Simon. Simon, when Simon's not here, we panic because he's the man who knows how to do this best.
Everyone could turn their cameras on. That'd be fantastic.
Come on, don't be shy.
Turn your cameras on and smile and wave.
Yeah. We've got 49 people so far today.
It's going to be a great together mode photo.
Which would be really great if everyone turns their camera on. But
we know we haven't got their camera on, so come on, guys.
Just let us know when we need to wave, Simon.
Well, do you know what? It's so...
This technology stuff is so hard.
I think you got to turn off the sharing and do the together mode, and then we'll see it.
Right. Do you guys? Oh, you guys want to see it? He can see it to be able to record it.
Okay.
Can you, Simon? You're good?
Well, no, sharing mode keeps taking over. So
okay, hang on. Let me stop. I'm going to stop so that hopefully that will get out of the way.
Look at all these smiling faces.
And I'll start recording in 3, 2. Please start waving. That'd be fantastic. I'll go for it. Just like Vessa goes on about.
Act like you're really enjoying yourself, so that we can show this to our friends and family.
Thank you very much, all. I will stop recording.
Good job.
And thanks to all of you for coming today. We can't do this without you.
Right,
well, we can actually, but it's not very interesting. We all just talk to each other.
Definitely not as much fun.
I'll pop back over to the presentation. All right. So we just finished this. All right. This will be, I think, the last slide that I go mumbo jumbo on. So how can you contribute? What could you do on these calls or out in your real life or your work life? You could present something on one of these calls. We're always looking for people to talk about how they've been using the maturity model
We haven't had much of that. People are definitely talking about the maturity model in many conversations. We would love to hear how it's impacted your organization if you're ever interested in talking about that. You can contribute on GitHub. All of the articles are in GitHub as part of learn.microsoft.com, and you can do pull requests. If you don't know how to do a pull request, we've had multiple people email us or get in touch with us in other ways with ideas. We're happy to do the work there for you if you don't understand GitHub, which is totally understandable that you don't understand it. So feedback, any tools, any artifacts that you've used in your work, and then socialize the content. Help us let more people know about this. Use the social media stuff that you follow, and talk about these calls and the maturity model itself, things that you've learned on your own. That would be great. These meetings are roughly monthly, and well, they are monthly, but sometimes we skip sometimes. And hopefully it's a safe space to talk about whatever we need to talk about. So you can see the calendar coming up for the rest of the year. These are the sessions we've had already this year. Next month is Ignite, so we're not quite sure what we're going to talk about, because sometimes at Ignite they announce something that makes us sort of change our thinking. But we will be here on November 19th, and then December we will have our winter break. And then we will be back in January of 2025. And I can't believe I'm saying 2025.
Crazy.
So thank you to all the people who came in September. That's a list of all of you. And there's some links there if you want to join us, or if there's something that you'd like to do with the Sharing is Caring team to learn more, follow up on things. And with that, I believe we will go to the main event. So what do mature organizations do next? If you're mature on any level, whether it's one competency or you're just brilliantly mature across the board, what should you think about? Sharon, take it away.
Yeah, so we were really talking about what we wanted to do for this session. And like Mark mentioned, we're always trying to come up with ideas for topics around the maturity model. So if you have any ideas, we're always open to that. We'd love to hear your feedback. And we were brainstorming at one point during one of those sessions, and we were like, what would be a really cool thing that we think people would want to hear about? And I mentioned something about mature organizations, and we all kind of were like, well, once you're mature, once you've hit the top, first of all, does that even happen? And what do you do? And so we built this discussion to really be around the idea of, what does a mature organization look like? What kind of questions are they asking? What kind of topics are they discussing? And we're going to do this as really as a discussion forum of us, but we really would love your participation. So whether you want to put your hand up and participate in the conversation, or if you want to post a chat in the chat, that'd be great. But we're just going to basically have some discussion topics, and we're going to talk about this kind of idea and this topic of, once you get to the top of that maturity level, what does that look like, and what kind of things do people experience? So, like I said, we thought about higher maturity organizations that we've seen, came up with a series of questions just to kind of get the conversation rolling. But nobody's really doing any official presenting for this particular topic. We really just want to have a really nice conversation and kind of go over some of that concept of, what kind of things are happening. So the first one that we're going to start with is, what are really the hallmarks of and we almost need it in quotes, right? Mature organization. And have you ever seen one? And the idea behind this is like, what's the most mature competency that you've ever seen, and what's next? And this kind of got brought on by the fact that I feel very lucky enough. And I just thought this was normal. I didn't realize that it, wasn't as normal as I thought. I worked at, I can honestly say I've worked at 2 different organizations in 30 years. that I could honestly say I felt were holistically at a 500 level, pretty much across the board in almost every area. And they were doing things that were, in my opinion, like above the bar. They were people who are on Gartner's watch list. They were doing, huge things for the community. They invest a lot. And so I was really lucky enough to get to have that experience. And so we started thinking about what are those things that those businesses are doing that's a little bit different at a business level, and also what are some of the things they're doing within each competency that maybe are a little bit different or a little bit more mature than what you would expect, at a business that hasn't hit that 500 level. So what are these qualities that we're seeing? So I'm seeing some comments in the chat.
So there's comments around, has anyone actually experienced a higher maturity organization? Sharon, you have,
Has anybody else? I mean, I'd love to hear, and this really is going to kind of probably open my eyes super duper wide, because I would love to hear if anybody else has seen anything. Feel free to post in the chat if you have, like, what some of those qualities are. I'm seeing a lot of people say, nope, I've never experienced
and I
it.
I think that we talked that this might be what happens is that everybody says, well, I've never seen a mature organization. Have you seen organizations that either that you've worked for or you've consulted to or you've read about that are mature in some ways? Like what kinds of things have you seen as being admirable in a sense? Diego, you had your hand up?
I did, but you kind of said exactly what I wanted to touch on. Like, having been following the maturity model for such a long time, it's not like a black and white thing, right? It's kind of like a wave. Certain organizations have like a super mature intranet, but do not have like a fairly mature implementation of OneDrive, or some have like a very great like citizen developer program, but do not know how to use SharePoint. So it's a combination really, and I feel like as I've moved around quite a bit, in a number of years, it's never like level 5 on everything. It's like certain things are like level 1, but some other things are 5, and some other things are like -2. So it really varies,
No, I think that's a great comment. I think we've had those conversations many times, and we as a group have really kind of come to believe, and out of those conversations have said many of the same things, is that most organizations have kind of different areas, and it's kind of like a person, right? Holistically, everything kind of comes together, but each competency oftentimes has its own level, and they don't always equal each other. So I think in general, we don't see mature organizations that are 500 across every single area.
Carol asked a good question. How big a team does it take to implement a high maturity organization? I don't think there are too many things that we say it depends to, but I think this is an it depends. And it's not necessarily how big your organization is. It's not necessarily how mature you want to be. It's how can you focus your efforts in a constructive way. For example, when I talk to people about using SharePoint well, I say that the best organizations I've worked with have had a consultative team. And I say team loosely because it might be, part of one person occasionally, but somebody who can answer questions when people say, I want to try something. That kind of thinking is an example of how big it can be, but it doesn't mean that there are like 22 people sitting in a room only doing this. It's part of thinking about how do you change your organization's sort of ethos, and how do you encourage innovation? How do you encourage people to ask questions and not feel like they're going to be criticized? All that kind of stuff, which can take a lot of time to change. Pia, you had your hand up.
Yeah, when it comes to size, the best organization I've seen to do this were actually just a handful of people. And the entire business that they had was mapped out with the business processes. They knew why they were doing what and when. And they actually built like their entire system in Dynamics and built everything with all their stakeholders, with all the top management. And I think that it's easier to do when you're a smaller group, but it costs too much money, and smaller businesses don't have that. So, because I think also larger businesses, they have such wide maturity in people, like how they can handle technology, and we have the resilience and everything. So I think that it's easier the smaller you are, but you need to have some cash to do this because it pays off later, much later, especially when you go into the 500, because you really need to have skilled people that go through a lot of training to get there. You don't win the Olympics, just by, let's see what we can do and with good spirits. No, you really have to invest in it.
I'm going to jump in, even though I put my hand up. I'm going to jump straight in just to sort of reinforce that point, Pia. So the company that I've just shut down, we were about level 400 on governance and compliance, and we were definitely level 400 on collaboration. There were 4 of us. So to your point, you can do it with really small teams. The reason that we were really good at governance was that was our key, differentiator, and it was in the health space. We had no choice; we had to be good at it. And we were great at collaboration because we went 9 months through COVID without ever having met each other, and we had to build a viable company. So necessity is the mother of invention in those cases. I'm interested to see where a company doesn't have to do it. What is it about that company that makes them really good at being 400 or above?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think the smaller it is, the easier it is if it's done correctly, and the bigger it gets, it gets harder. I think you have to invest, but I think it gets harder. I see, Michael, you have your hand up. Did you have a comment or question?
Yeah, I'm going to argue that that depending, like, too small and you don't have the resources to do this, you don't have enough people to have the time to invest and spend on some of these things. Like, I'm thinking about this in the context of, say, the maturity part of my maturity model that I've been contributing to is about service management, which involves watching the message center on a regular, probably weekly basis at least. And small organizations don't have the people with the time to keep track of and take action on all the changes that come through. Big organizations do, and I've seen big organizations like I've worked for 1,000-person organization. I worked for a 60,000-person organization. The 60,000-person organization is much more mature on governance, but the I'd say like less mature on user enablement, user adoption, and I've seen organizations in the middle, in the, say, 3,000 to 8,000 size organizations, where they can be much better on user adoption, and can have enough size to afford people spending time on service management. But some of those might be struggling with like some of the governance things. So and again, I think if you're too small, you're just not going to have the resources to be able to devote to any of these things. You're just trying to keep the lights on and keep things from breaking and doing tech support. I think you need to have enough size so that you can afford to have people working on it strategically, and have those people have the bandwidth to spend on the behaviors that are the more mature behaviors.
Yeah, very well put. Elon.
Yeah. I think what I've experienced as a consultant helping organizations go from 100 on up and never experiencing what I'll call the unicorn of the 500 level company that Sharon, that you've experienced, is, and regardless of size, the common hallmark is the continuous improvement, the dedication to continuous improvement, and the culture supporting that continuous improvement, so that they're committed to making the change whenever they embark on a project, and that levels up, competencies and other areas that might not necessarily be applicable to the delivery associated with the project, but there's competencies that help make that delivery more successful, that they level up because of their commitment to continuous improvement.
What a great transition. That was super helpful. Deb, did you have a comment?
If I could unmute here. Yes, I do. So, I mean, my challenge has always been to get leadership involved, to make this a priority and understand that this is important for the growth and future maturity of your company in general. And a lot of it is what we need now. They just want it to work. They don't want to actually have to do anything to make it work. There's also a lot of turnover, especially with these smaller companies. I tend to work in a lot of biotech companies, a lot of turnover. I spent a lot of time training people. Those people left either via layoff or they just, gave up and quit. And then the new people come in, they have no interest in learning this stuff. There's no push from the new leadership that's come in to do this because they don't understand why this is important. And I think a lot of the companies just don't see the what's in it for me. I think Copilot and all the security stuff, that now becomes our what's in it for me, to get them on board, to get them understand that they need to have this kind of maturity. They need to have this kind of data governance in place. But
unfortunately, Copilot is not going to fix culture, management,
fix it.
Strategy. It doesn't fix any of that stuff. It just makes it look, it brings out the bad part,
Exactly.
It shows you the holes that you have in all.
Exactly. And that's my point. They're actually going to see the holes, and then that hopefully will get them the what's in it for me for putting this in place. But the problem is, by the time they see it, they've got, terabyte, 2 terabytes, 3 terabytes, 5 terabytes of data that they now have to govern. And it's going to be expensive.
Yeah, I want to add one comment. I've seen a lot of chats about leadership and being supportive, and we're talking about culture of continuous improvement. And I think the biggest hallmarks that I have seen for this first couple of topics in those higher maturity organizations is the leaders. They walked the walk. So first of all, they did what they said they wanted to see in the organization. And to me, that was a big deal. But they were very visible. They did things the way they said they wanted them to run. They were very metric oriented. And I've heard several comments about, everything needing to go fast. And what's really interesting is both of the organizations that I would really say holistically were at a 500 level, they were both very cutting edge. They were both always on the edge of things, but they always did things slowly. So it's that whole, you need to slow down to speed up. They were very specific about what they did. Their hiring processes were fairly slow and had a lot of process built around them. But they were basically the idea of, while all the little stuff was kind of happening and all the trendy stuff was happening, they were very specific about what they did, and they did everything for a reason and everything with purpose. And they did not allow that kind of, buzz of whatever was new or whatever was, trendy at that particular moment. They didn't get distracted easily, I guess, is what I would like to say. It's not that they were not constantly R&D and looking at the future, but they didn't get distracted by the stuff that needed to happen today. They were always making sure that they were, holding themselves to a larger goal and investing towards that cause. And so I think, when I think about what you guys are talking about, with leadership and with all that kind of little impulsivity, distractibility, I don't remember there really being much of that in either of those organizations, where I have seen that in pretty much every other organizations I've been part of. Pia, I see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, when you do something in an organization and you rise to a level and it's amazing, usually when you have like cool, amazing consultants in, or you have a project, and then when that, steps off, it goes down because you do not have the change management as a process going on all the time. And I think that, if we want to change this, If we want to be like, and I'm not saying like we in this scenario or like in this meeting right here, but like we as people, it's mostly about HR, because if we have it that it's mandatory training, it's mandatory when you onboarding, and you do have, I implement what I call a digital leadership program, where I go through what I call the 4 pillars of collaboration, which is communicating, keeping in touch, documents, meetings and notes, and tasks and to-do lists. And I said, like, it doesn't matter what type of leader you are, these are what the things that you have to do. So I pull them through that, and I help them do it with their work group. But I hold them accountable to themselves in this digital leader group. And if we get HR to actually participate here and say like, okay, this is mandatory for all of our leaders, and then it will come in and they're like, okay, now we have Loop. How are we going to handle Loop and do that in the leadership group? Everyone learns what it is and says like, okay, I can use this. I can't use this. Okay, fine. Then it's not mainstream. Then not everyone has to do it. But when you just go like, oh, this is so amazing, the balloons and t-shirts, and then when, those are popped, people go back to email and Excel spreadsheets. So you have to have the change management process going all the time.
Yeah, totally agree. No, that's great. Great like conversation, because like it's so relevant, right? So we've got so many issues with keeping up with things and keeping people on top of things. I was thinking about the fact that in my own organization from day one, as a Six Sigma black belt, I knew that was going to be a big deal. And one of the things I really wanted to do was exactly that, stay on top of everything. And what's really interesting to me is I'm just sitting here thinking about how much training needs to happen around this topic, because I've struggled to find somebody that can stay on top of keeping up with process management and being more disciplined around rigor. And I talk about this constantly, and it's so hard. Even for somebody who wants it, it's hard. So imagine if you have an organization where they're not prioritizing that, how much more difficult that must be to be able to keep up with that. RJ, I see you've got your hand up. This is such a great conversation. I'm gonna try to probably skip through some of these questions as we go.
Yes. So just to share perspective from an executive perspective, IT leader, I've been in a bunch of different businesses. I've played with this maturity model quite a bit, but not as much as some of you guys. I'm coming at this from I was internal vice president of IT at a large AI GovCon, ran a pretty decent sized team and had to get things through there. I'm now an MSP supporting GovCon, getting compliant, focused on CMMC. A lot of the things that we're doing here in the maturity model map over there and push to an ROI. And I think when you're talking about buy-in, particularly from executive buy-in, I think her name was Tina Nuno. It was a Gartner symposium that I picked up about a year ago. She did an excellent job of breaking down the C-suite and how to brief them. If anybody hasn't seen that, it comes down to 3 things: cost, revenue, and risk. And she does a great job of showing you how to present to the executive leadership team of any size organization. It is excellent in how to get their attention. So when you talk about cybersecurity, there's risk to revenue, right? And so when you have 2 of the 3, you're going to get their attention. When you have features, which we get hung up on in a technology perspective, because we're tech people, that's what we get excited about. They don't care. They care about capabilities, and those capabilities either existing or not, and them either driving an increase in revenue or a decrease in cost and risk. And if you can get all 3 of those in a project pitch, you're always going to get funded. If you can get 2 of those, you got a really good conversation. If you have less than 2, you're wasting your time. So from my perspective, when we're talking about implementing maturity and how it affects the business, it's our job as executives from an IT perspective or a technology perspective to bring that people, process, technology and apply it to risk, revenue, and cost. And if you can do those things, you're going to get all the money you want. And if you can't, you're like the rest of us. And it sucks. And you're fighting uphill to try to deploy basic things that everybody needs from a ground forces level. Executive team doesn't care. The board doesn't care. The people pulling the purse strings don't care. unless you can tie it to revenue, cost, or risk.
Yeah. Yeah. No, RJ, I can tell you from personal experience, I did a Six Sigma project once that they tried for 7 years to get approved for a new product. And I did one belt project that essentially tied those three things together and showed the ROI, and they signed it without even thinking about it. They were like, it would be dumb to not do this because I showed it would lower their risk, increase their revenue, and reduce their cost. And they were like, oh, well, why wouldn't we do it?
We had when I did an acquisition. I'll just give you guys a use case real quick. When we did an acquisition, we picked up a company. We at the time had 7 AWS accounts with numerous things underneath it. When we picked them up, they had 130 accounts all over the place. And I had been pushing for dedicated support, right? The enhanced AWS support to be able to get billing in one place, get the platform. They wouldn't do it. They wouldn't do it. They wouldn't do it. When I sat down with the AWS teammate that I had, I said, what could I do savings wise if I do reservations, if I do the proper reporting, if I get it? Well, it was a 40% savings, right? So I decreased risk, I decreased cost, and I enabled, I made some arguments that I was going to increase revenue, but it didn't really matter. I got $800,000-ish in funding for those work streams. I couldn't get them to give me $50,000 to buy advanced support before that conversation. And so that's just an example of, like, if you can articulate, like you just said, those value props to them, they'll give you what you need as long as they see some sort of ROI or enhancement. So sorry. Thank you, guys.
No, fantastic comment. So I'm going to go ahead and move on just because we have a ton of slides, and we don't have to hit all these questions, but guys, we do not have to hit all these questions. These were just to keep the discussion going, but I'm going to move on to the next one. So what are the career paths in a more mature organization? So we were talking about what does an individual contributor look like in a mature organization versus a less mature organization, and what are some of the things that they do to attract, develop, and retain talent in a competitive labor market. So when we think about like individual contributors and we think about what that career path looks like, I think sometimes in a mature organization we recognize that an individual contributor can be an individual contributor. There's no requirement for them to go up if they're good at what they do, because we don't need them to become a manager. We already have plans around that. Whereas I think sometimes in less mature organizations, and I'm not saying it is or it isn't, I'm just saying I've noticed that in the more mature organizations, people are pushed to their zone of genius, not pushed up because we need to maintain their paychecks, right? Whereas in more mature organizations, I've noticed that people are fostered and supported into their zone of genius, regardless of where we need them to be in the organization. We're pushing to the contributor, not pushing to the model and, keeping them going up so that we're not, incurring new costs around those managers and those people. So I'm just kind of curious what you guys think around like employee management in more mature organizations. RJ, do you still have your hand up? Are you wanting to get in on this one?
No, sorry, I need to drop that down. I apologize.
No, you're fine. We just thought this was a fun conversation topic because I think a lot of organizations struggle with this. They struggle with resource management. They struggle with finding people. They struggle with managing and growing people. Yeah, Simon.
So for me, one of the best strategies is being able to help someone understand how they can be successful in that organization. So having a manager which is able to work with their people and help them understand how they can be successful. So that helps keep them and retain the top talent and allow them to work out where they want to go as well. Because as you say, not so well. A member of my team in particular who doesn't really want to manage people, just wants to get more technical and get better at that, but hates the idea of managing people. And so it's just understanding that, so you don't push them away because you're trying to take them up and make them into managers when they don't want to be. We see that a lot in the NHS and healthcare, where great doctors become managers and then not very good at that often. So yeah.
I think another thing is we try to hang on to people. So I know one thing that's been really like it's been a growing point for me is I think when you invest in your people heavily and you really support them to be successful, it can grow them quickly. And the risk to that is that they will leave the organization. And I think that's something mature organizations recognize, and they have to think, when you think about the extra investment that it's going to take, because now those people are going to look elsewhere because they're like, well, I have all these skills and I've really matured quickly and I've moved up because my culture has allowed me to do this. And now what's going to happen is I think other organizations are going to recognize that very quickly and they're going to try to come after them. And one of the things that in the two organizations that I talk about, one of the things that I recognized that was a little bit different is they were very candid about the fact that they're like, look, we're going to grow you as a person, and we really want you to make a commitment for a certain amount of time before you leave us. But if that does come up, just know that if you ever want to come back, that's fine. If there's space for you. And what was really interesting is that you would see some people leave, but I recognized in the time that I was at both of those organizations, that often people would leave for 3, 6 months, a year, and they would very quickly return because they recognized that the place they went may pay them more, may give them a better title, but the work balance, like the work-life balance, it just was not the same. And so we had a lot of people who would come back to both of those employers on a pretty regular basis, and continue to move on with that original company because they saw the difference in the places that they went, which I thought that speaks volumes, just volumes, to be able to continue to grow those people with no thought of, what if these people leave? They were like, it's okay if they leave. And we don't care. Like, we're going to support them anyways. And I thought that was fantastic.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, Pia.
Yeah, I was working for a consultant agency who had a very open door policy about these things, because they said, like, well, everyone who's working here, who's leaving for usually working with one of the customers, they will become customers. So we will keep the collaboration and we'll keep everything going, because you have your brand, and you have your spokespeople, and you have all the secondhand compliments, so it will do your business better. And also then after a while they're like, well, I did that was cool, now I want to go back to being a consultant again, and then came back, and they brought their new experience with them. So just keep an open door, both for leaving and coming in, because when you tie people down, they feel controlled, because we do have, someone get a kid, someone gets married, someone moves across the country. But, if you're treated well, you'll come back some way or another as a customer, or, maybe you buy it.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, Simon.
I guess as I've listened to the conversation, I think that the great mature organizations both understand and communicate the balance between the needs of the individuals, the employees, and those of the organization. So sometimes they will ask people to go, we need you to go and do this role because you're going to be great at it. And other times they're going to go, you were great in that role, what do you need from us now? What do you want to do? And keeping that, it's a tension, but allowing the thing to swing both ways, as opposed to having fixed, immutable, laid out career paths where you've got to hit certain milestones. I don't think that makes for a mature organization. I think it makes for a controlling one. So yin and yang.
It's almost like an employment agreement is a relationship with the business.
There we go.
Let's see, Michael.
So, we've talked about career development, but this is all sort of very general and doesn't feel specific to M365 at all. And I'm thinking about this in terms of my role at the organization I'm at and my role at the previous 3 or 4 organizations I've been at, which are all internal IT roles. My title currently is Microsoft Product Manager. though you could make the case that that's a misnomer because I'm not doing product management, I'm doing service ownership, but I'm also doing user adoption. And when I was looking for this job, the names of the roles that are more or less the same the names were widely differentiated. Like some call this some kind of an engineer, so I'm wondering if not that a organization is more mature like when they call it a particular job a particular name, and I think a lot of what we've been defining as maturity when it comes to career path is sort of universal and not M365 specific, but I do wonder about if there's some guidance we as a community can offer about career paths in M365. So, like, I am the Microsoft product manager now, which is different than being the M365 product manager because I'm also responsible for things like our unified support contract and our enterprise agreement, and basically own the Microsoft relationship. I mean, as a professional, I wonder, okay, where do I go from here in terms of what does up look like? And part of me says I don't even care about going up because I still fixated on the problems I want to solve in the role I'm in, and I feel like I could be in this role for many years, still trying to get everybody to be more productive with M365, making sure that everybody in my organization knows how to use Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and Outlook and OneNote and so forth as effectively as they can. So I wonder about not just like what a job ladder for M360 or how many different job ladders there are for M365, and we as the maturity model or even the contributors to the community documentation, if there's some documentation about what M365 careers look like. Because again, if you go to LinkedIn and search for something, you get wildly different titles and wildly different descriptions. And I mean, I started out as a developer. I haven't touched code for several years now. I've been helping people use and operate M365, and I still get recruiters coming to me about development jobs and going, why do you think that that's even a fit? So where am I going with this? I feel like there's that HR departments are very immature when it comes to M365 roles, and is that an opportunity for us as a community to help set some standards?
I think it's great feedback. I see a lot of people commenting on it. I don't know if I'm like sitting here taking notes as we're talking. I think that's great feedback. And yeah, I mean, overall, the maturity model, is based on the lean maturity model, which is more holistic, and it's looking at competencies. That the idea is that underlying at an architecture level, if you are mature in different competencies across the organization, then when you go to implement a tool or support a tool or manage a product or a feature change or whatnot, it's a lot easier to do because that everything's going to change constantly. So it's really, about, good business management and good change management holistically. And then how are we applying that to M365? And today's topic is a little more generic than normal, but I love, that comment. And I think there is a lot of opportunity for us to talk about those M365 roles and how those kind of play. And so, I mean, I took notes. I think I see all of my group members taking notes. I think maybe we'll talk about and Michael, love to chat with you about maybe doing something like that for next year and put it on our docket.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been thinking about those things as well, and I'm actually going to be putting together something like that where I how I'm using the maturity model right now, I'm taking the view from the governance group, and I have the HR communication and facilities and that, and be like, okay, for you to have level 300 in these competencies and these roles need to be at this level of competency, something. But I think also it's very important when we talk about us as experts. When we develop our knowledge, it needs to go outside. And the correct career path looks like a drunk squirrel been running around, because just I like to think of it like, take a look upstreams and downstreams. Working with requirements. Okay, so you need to do that. Okay, let's map out business processes. That's something completely different. Information architecture, it's not about Microsoft 365. It's it's something else. So you really need to broaden yourself and see other industries. So it's really hard to be like, this is the career path. But I was just going to be like, Simon, what you said, just a comment to that, balancing the individual and the organization. When I was working and I had 3 people under me, and one of the guys said that he was going to have a conversation with another company. And my advice to him was, number 1, if you go there, you will be disloyal to me and this business. Number 2, if you don't go, you will be disloyal to you and me as your mentor, because I will always support you. You need to do what is right for you. You need to go out and figure out and see all of those things. And then he was looking at me being very confused. And I'm like, was I clear? And he's like, okay, no, like, I support you. This is how it is. We need to do this. It's both the organization and the individual. And that is about being the manager, that was also in the comments, to have the conversation. So
I want to take the little nugget out of that I heard, that I saw in both of the organizations that I felt like were really high maturity levels. Everybody had a dedicated mentor, and they were buddied up with somebody constantly. So I was always I always had a mentor, and I always had a mentee in both of those organizations. And they were assigned to you. And you could ask to change if you wanted to, but ultimately the goal of each organization is that everybody was always being mentored by somebody and mentoring somebody else. And I think out of all that you just said, in my opinion, from a maturity level, I think that's a huge nugget, because I think oftentimes we go in, we hide in a corner, we do our jobs, and we do not have that mentorship to know, how do I make these decisions within the organization and outside of the organization on a regular basis by somebody who's not our manager specifically. And I think having somebody to help you make some of those strategic decisions that's within your organization that you trust is crucial to your career. So I think that's, great feedback. All right, so I'm going to move on to the next slide. How do high maturity companies balance the pursuit of short-term profits with long-term goals? And I know I kind of made this comment earlier, but it was that kind of slow down to speed up concept. And some of the comments that we talked about internally, is that kind of slow and steady wins the race. I always laugh and joke, we talk about the whole Jeff Bezos comment of, at the very beginning when he started, I think he was losing money because by the time people were buying things and he was shipping things, he was losing money. He's like, it's okay, we'll make it up in volume. And I think, the joke about that is that he had a vision, he had a strategic plan, and he was willing to invest at the beginning to see that strategic plan come to fruition. And I think when we think about, what high maturity companies do, and it obviously, once again, this is, across the board in every competency, they're kind of managing those competencies in a way that makes sense. How are they looking at that? And I think they're thinking about, how do I manage these short-term issues and make sure that we have as few fires as possible and we're as proactive as possible to mitigate every single risk that's coming up, or at least identify and know what our risk tolerance is, all the way to having a vision and having strategic goals. And I think the most mature organizations have 3 to 5 year strategic plans. They know what it is, but they have flexibility built into those plans so that if the market changes, if the climate changes, if something comes up, they understand all the way down to a $1 level what every risk is and what every potential variance is that they can manage to, so that if something happens, they know how to be flexible within that vision, within that strategy. But I really would love to hear, if you guys, what experience you guys have had around the idea of short-term gains versus long-term goals. Chirp, chirp. This is huge. Like, I think this is a big deal.
I think
We
about
thought
it a little
we
bit.
thought this question would get all kinds of answers. Go ahead, Tia. Sorry.
I think about this a little bit differently. It's more like, if you don't take a little risk, you take a big risk. So you need to have some part of your organization to test something, to try something. And I think then the short term will be, within the long term, and be like, okay, short term we're going to see is power apps for us, is for this process or whatever. Okay, it fails, that's fine. We can manage it. We're resilient enough. But when you have the long term where you don't take that risk, you don't do anything that isn't, to the dollar, down to the dollar, because you don't know what you don't know. So you need to take a little risk to avoid taking a big risk. And I always think about Nokia, how they were such great engineers and failed miserably.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. So I'm going to go ahead and move on. We've got a couple minutes left. I think we've got 2 questions left. So I'm going to go ahead and move on, since everybody's kind of quiet in there, but that's okay. Like, keep chattering and keep thinking. Hopefully a lot of this is just to get you guys thinking about what's out there and what's possible. And back to our technology, this is kind of like at the very end, we want to talk about technology and risk, because we think these are kind of the big pieces to all of this, especially for this particular community. But how do we think about technology adoption in terms of, maintaining high maturity levels, and how do we think these companies stay ahead of technology trends? And I'll kick this conversation off because we had talked a little bit earlier about, this idea of kind of keeping an eye of what's going out there. I know both of the mature organizations that I worked with had a dedicated R&D group. And one of the things that they did is they invested in people being all the way at the front of the pack, knowing what was coming and knowing what was going on, so that they already knew what the opportunities were and what the risks are, so that they knew what they wanted to invest in and what they didn't want to invest in. But I think it was, they were always kind of staying ahead of it, but they didn't let that R&D knowledge slow down the already created vision, the already created track, the already created process and plan that they had in place. They just incorporated it as part of the fabric as they kind of went on. And so it was a really good insight for me, I think, as opposed to just like constantly putting out fires and dealing with stuff day to day. Yes, Simon, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I think just if you flip it around the other way and say how, you see those organizations which have low maturity levels. I was chatting to one today, and, they try something, it doesn't work. They try the next thing, it doesn't work. And it's, it's always the technology that's the problem, rather than how they're bringing it in and giving it some time. And so the adoption is so key, because if you don't get that technology adopted by the organization, they're never going to get the benefits from it. And that is going to stop them from being able to kind of keep ahead of their competition as well. So adoption is a massive part, that staff and training and people community competencies to fit into that. So that's my point.
I'll always say that adoption isn't the point. You give people tools that will actually make them better at what they do and demonstrate that to them. They will use the tools. If after the fact you've built something and you're trying to get people to use it and they're not using it, well, you built the wrong thing.
Yeah.
It's no different than back in the dark ages when I was working in the pre-technology world, where you'd build a process that nobody could follow, and the papers just didn't move in the right way. Well, it was the process that was the problem, not the not the people doing the process.
So I know we're at the top of the hour. I think this has been a great conversation, and I can tell like we kind of got hung up on a few questions to kind of slow us down, which is great, right? That means there's more to talk about. That means there's more opportunity here. I see Mark mentioned maybe a part 2. So I think maybe we will go back and talk about, pulling some of these questions at a deeper level and coming back. But I want to go ahead and pull this up because we're at the top of the hour. So if you don't know about the maturity model, feel free to go out and take a look. You can follow us on Twitter. You can join our calls by downloading this link right here. We'd love. This has been a great group. Please come back and join us every month for these conversations, these topics, these presentations. If you'd like to participate, feel free to reach out to any of us and let us know. I don't know if anybody else has anything else on the team, but thank you guys so much for being here.
Thank you.